Deep inside the jungles of Malaysia, a foreign man slowly undressed a native woman. After spending the night together, she became a guide to his understanding of her world. Back in the 1980s, British-controlled regions followed a silent tradition to help newcomers grasp native languages. A beautiful young local woman was often chosen to assist and accompany the officials. Apart from helping with daily chores, these young women were expected to meet certain personal needs of the foreign guests until the visitors became fluent in the native tongue. They were often called dictionary partners, but were never given the status of a wife. Still, their daily life was no different from that of a married woman. A young traveler named John arrived in Sarawak, Malaysia, carrying his dreams and the wisdom passed on by his late father. His goal was to build schools and bring education to the tribal communities, a mission supported by Henry, his father's old friend, and the local authority. John was given shelter in a small thatched hut deep within the dense forest. On his first day in the village, John was warmly greeted by the Iban community. The tribal leader and the locals arranged a traditional feast in his honor. Among them, a graceful young girl stepped forward, holding a bowl of rice wine. John hesitated. He didn't want to drink on his very first workday, but Malacca gently reminded him it was part of the local tradition. With a polite smile, John accepted and finished the wine in one sip. As he looked around, his eyes met the girl's, who had offered the drink. Her gaze was gentle, like a quiet stream. Her bronzed skin shimmered under the light, captivating John completely. As the rice wine warmed his body, he found himself slowly drawn into the raw, untamed energy of tribal life. During a festive evening of dance, John once again caught sight of the mysterious girl who had deeply occupied his thoughts. She moved like a vision from the heavens, each of her steps flowing like poetry. John's heart raced uncontrollably, like a deer startled in the wild. Trying to calm himself, he hurriedly drank a large bowl of rice wine. Before long, the drink clouded his senses. He dozed off, while the girl continued her graceful performance. The following morning, Henry summoned him with an assignment. He explained that mining had been banned in the area by the British, but a few Vietnamese laborers had trespassed. Henry gave a chilling order. John was to retrieve the severed heads of those men. John was horrified, shaken by such brutality. He was still trying to grasp the horror when the tribal leader arrived. She brought along a girl named Selma. Henry informed John that Selma would now be his dictionary lover. As someone unfamiliar with the customs of the land, John didn't understand what that meant. Henry attempted to explain it carefully, choosing his words with care. But since Henry spoke too vaguely, John couldn't grasp the real meaning. He stood frozen, confused by such an unusual tradition. What left him even more surprised was knowing that Selma had turned down 2 British men before. And yet, this time, she had chosen John on her own. Selma's mother had also once held the same title of dictionary lover. So, Selma wasn't just fluent in her own tongue, but spoke English with remarkable skill. Seeing such an intelligent and beautiful woman being offered to him, John couldn't help but feel tempted. Yet everything about this custom clashed with the values he had grown up with. After struggling with his thoughts, he finally decided to turn down the tribe's offer. He felt that saying no was the respectful thing to do, but unknowingly, he ended up offending the entire tribe. This tradition had quietly become a part of tribal life since colonization, and no one had ever dared to break it. After thinking through his situation, John felt he had no real choice but to accept Selma as his dictionary partner. Still, he firmly stated that their bond would be strictly limited to language help and daily support. Thus, Selma shifted into John's small, straw-roofed hut. Their rooms were separated by nothing more than a paper-thin bamboo screen, thin enough for every breath to be heard. The following morning, Malacca followed John's command and returned with the heads of the miners. John barely looked at them, giving only a glance before setting out to report back to Henry. He had no idea that the entire thing was a trick played on him by the villagers. As laughter echoed around, Selma quickly realized something was wrong. She opened the bag and discovered that it contained the head of a monkey, not a human. It turned out that Malacca had secretly harbored feelings for Selma for quite some time. Now that Selma was with John, jealousy drove Malacca to pull this humiliating prank. But as a representative of the colonizers, John couldn't let such mockery slide. He gave Malacca an ultimatum: either bring the actual heads of the Vietnamese miners by tomorrow, or lose all the tribe's domesticated pigs. Yet this mild threat had no effect on the villagers. They only laughed louder. Just as John's anger reached its peak, his cook unintentionally made things worse. He casually mentioned that he had brought his nephew along from their homeland. That's when it finally clicked for John. He understood what they had been hinting at all along. Disgust swept over him as he realized how badly his values had been misunderstood. He never imagined that acting with decency would make the locals think he was some kind of deviant. In a fit of rage, he lashed out at Selma and warned her that she would no longer hold the title of his dictionary companion. Hurt and humiliated, Selma chose to leave. The following morning, John was startled to see that Selma hadn't gone back to her people. Instead, she had quietly spent the entire night beneath the small shed right outside his door. John gently urged her to return to the village, but in that moment, a deeper realization dawned on him. This land, its people, and their ways were nothing like the world he came from. Maybe the only way to truly carry out his role here was to become a part of their world, not stand apart from it. He apologized to Selma with honesty, saying that his refusal to share a bed had nothing to do with her beauty. It came from a place of personal belief and deep respect. He hoped to rebuild the bond they had once shared. Selma, touched by his truthfulness, chose to stay by his side. But what no one foresaw was that the man sent to bring change to Sowak would slowly be changed by the very people he came to teach. At night, John spent time learning the local language with Selma by his side. With her calm and patient teaching, he slowly began to grasp the basics of the dialect. During their lessons, John came to know something unexpected. Selma's father had once been a British officer. Much like John, he too had left when Selma was just 4, returning to England never to be seen again. All that remained of him was a children's storybook left on her table, but Selma couldn't read the English words written inside it. John sat beside her and slowly helped her learn, guiding her finger over each letter as he taught. As they spent more time together, a quiet closeness began to form between them. Their eyes lingered on each other longer, their stares filled with emotion and silence. Selma reached out softly and touched John's neck with her fingers, whispering the name of the letter J in her own language. A quiet yet electric tension filled the space between them. Eventually, they could no longer resist their emotions and shared a passionate kiss. Later that night, after a moment of closeness, Selma suddenly got up and began to gather her things. John looked at her in confusion. How could someone go from warmth to distance so quickly? "Why do you always leave?" he asked. "For a sleeping dictionary, that's the rule," she replied softly. "In Iban tradition," she continued, "if a man and a woman sleep together for 5 nights in a row, they're considered engaged. You wouldn't want that, would you?" Her words left John stunned and silent. The very next day, Henry's daughter Cecil arrived at the tribe to spend her holidays. She was an Oxford graduate with expertise in anthropology and sociology. Her academic work focused on the traditions of the Iban people, including the unusual practice of dictionary lovers. Everyone around John believed it was improper to develop emotions for a sleeping dictionary, but John stood firm in his beliefs. He argued that the native people deserve dignity and love just like anyone else. Henry, however, cut him off immediately. "That is strictly forbidden," Henry warned sternly. He explained that if romantic feelings were allowed to grow, British authority in the region could weaken. The disagreement turned into a fiery argument, ending with the two parting ways on bad terms. Feeling restless and rejected, John went searching for Selma. Perhaps she was the only one who could give him a sense of belonging. With her support, John's grasp of the local dialect grew stronger each day. He also began stepping into his leadership role within the community. When a serious land feud broke out between two families, John offered a solution using the local tongue, a tug-of-war match to settle the dispute. Though the idea seemed silly at first, it was surprisingly effective and culturally meaningful. The losing family accepted the outcome without protest. Just when John was feeling proud of this unusual yet brilliant solution, he turned around and noticed Cecil getting ready to photograph Selma. Despite her firm tone making Selma uneasy, she had no option but to follow the colonizer's commands. She glanced at John with silent hope, wishing he would intervene and stop Cecil. Before John could respond, Henry called him over urgently after noticing something strange. A nearby village upstream was hit by an unknown sickness, and dead bodies had floated downstream. Their condition suggested a deadly epidemic was spreading. Later updates confirmed more villagers were falling sick. Determined to find answers, John set off for the affected village. Before leaving, Henry's wife approached him with a proposal. She wished to arrange a marriage between her daughter Cecil and John to protect him. She promised support for John's dream of building a school for the locals if he agreed. Though the offer was appealing, John had no feelings for Cecil and refused. When he returned, Selma was quietly upset and wouldn't forgive him for letting Cecil take the photo. For the first time, Selma felt how distant and cold this British man was toward his own people. John, however, never saw himself that way. Still, he found no words to argue against it. Gradually, a divide started growing between them. The next morning, John led his team upriver to check on the village. On the way, they saw many indigenous people who had fallen victim to the strange disease. John understood the situation was far worse than he had thought. When they reached the village, they found it had already fallen apart. Most villagers were bedridden, suffering from a serious illness. Surprisingly, there was plenty of food, and the sick showed no usual signs of a contagious disease. Suddenly, a gunshot shattered the silence. Luckily, Malika reacted quickly and pushed John out of danger, shocking him. The shooter was also a white man, which made John feel the situation was even more complicated. He told Malika to pursue the shooter, leading to a surprising find. A group of Dutchmen were blasting the mountainside nearby. John picked up some of the scattered pieces, which turned out to be pure silver, but there was no time to think about it. When he got back to the village, Selma had already collapsed from illness. Seeing her sick, John became completely frantic. Now, silver mines and hidden plots didn't matter to him at all. His only concern was to get Selma home quickly for treatment. He decided she should rest for the night before they left. The next morning, they woke up surrounded by angry tribesmen. It turned out the Dutchmen had lied, blaming John for bringing disaster to the natives. Luckily, Selma spoke their language fluently. She calmed the angry tribesmen before the situation got worse. To gain their trust, Selma offered them rice. But then John realized something terrible. The natives didn't grow rice. Suddenly, everything made sense. The rice had come from the Dutch. They had poisoned it to destroy the nearby villages around the silver mine, hoping to take everything for themselves. Meanwhile, the Dutch miners, unaware of the danger, were smoking cigarettes, feeling safe and untouchable. Suddenly, a poisoned arrow struck one of them. No matter how many guns they had, they couldn't fight an enemy they couldn't see. Within moments, the tribesmen killed every single one of the Dutch miners. After surviving such a life-or-death ordeal together, John's feelings for Selma grew stronger and more certain. But Selma's background meant they could never be truly united forever. Selma asked, "Where do you plan to run away with me?" But John had never thought about running away. He naively believed he could change everything. He promised Selma he would persuade Henry to approve their marriage. However, when he returned to Sarawak, he quickly realized how unrealistic his hope was. The British government strictly forbade marriages between colonizers and native women, and John was not the first to dream otherwise. Years ago, Henry himself had fallen in love with a native woman, but because he insisted on staying with her, the story ended in heartbreak. Not only did the woman die filled with anger, but their daughter was also never accepted. Henry warned John not to make the same mistakes. He even threatened John with a false murder charge to control him. Meanwhile, Selma faced her own harsh battle. The tribal chief demanded she marry someone from the tribe, or she would be put to death. By the time John arrived, Selma was already locked inside a cage. John tried with all his might to open the bars, but the iron door wouldn't move. He commanded the tribesmen to help, but no one listened. At that moment, Henry arrived with his men. Not wanting John to be accused of murder, Selma made the painful decision to give up, and the two lovers were forced to part ways. A year later, John went back to London and married Cecil, but he did it only to chase his dream of building a school, while his heart still longed for Selma. Soon after the wedding, John and Cecil sailed back to Sarawak. The land was just as poor and hot as before. During the welcome feast, John kept looking around, hoping to see Selma, but she was nowhere. Cecil noticed his behavior and knew exactly who he was searching for. That night, she tried to get close to him, but lost control and bit his shoulder hard. She had heard Selma's story from her mother, but instead of jealousy, she accepted it, knowing Selma had married Malaka and had a child with him. Cecil just wanted to move on and create a happy life with John, but she never imagined things wouldn't go as planned. One day, while washing his hands by the river, John saw Selma on the other side. What shocked him most was the white baby she held in her arms. John stood frozen, finally realizing the child Cecil had spoken of was his own. Years of longing and regret were now tied to the presence of his son. Overcome with emotion, John could wait no longer. He had to see Selma and their child at once, seizing a moment when Malaka was away. John found Selma secretly, and their reunion as father and son was touching, yet full of pain. but their love had to remain hidden in the shadows. Whenever John missed his child, he could only sneak away to visit them. However, no secret stays hidden forever. Soon, Malika discovered John's secret meetings with Selma and the child. One night, Malika quietly entered John's room, holding a knife tightly. He was ready to take John's life. Just in time, Selma arrived and stopped the attack. In the struggle, Malika only managed to cut John's shoulder, wounding him. Though disaster was avoided, Malika's attempt to kill a colonizer was unforgivable. Henry ordered John to lead Malika's trial himself, making it clear that the only punishment was hanging. The next day, at the trial, John did everything he could to defend Malika, hoping to save his life. But Malika, overwhelmed by guilt and despair, refused to resist. With no other option, John reluctantly sentenced him to death. Still, deep inside, John could not accept this fate. The night before the execution, Selma sneaked into Henry's room and stole the prison keys. But when she reached the cell, she was shocked to find John had already unlocked the door. John even gave Malika his own weapon, giving him a chance to flee. As they watched Malika vanish into the night, both knew there was no turning back. They promised to meet again the next night and escape together. The next morning, Henry found out Malika had escaped. He knew John was behind it, but since John was his son-in-law, after an angry outburst, he let it go. Selma, however, was not as lucky. Henry's men caught her and forced her to become Henry's personal servant. When Henry tried to harm her, a kind-hearted chef risked his life to rescue her. With his help, Selma escaped, but the chaos caused her to miss her meeting with John. When she finally arrived, John was nowhere to be seen. It turned out John was caught by his wife Cecil just before leaving. While writing a farewell letter, Cecil showed no anger or surprise, only calm. She had long accepted that John's love for Selma was something he could never give up. Perhaps the kindest act was to finally let him go free. In one last embrace, Cecil released the husband who never truly belonged to her, letting him seek his true happiness. At that moment, her sacrifice was deeply moving. Without delay, John rushed to the dock. But fate was cruel. The ship had already sailed away. Frustrated and helpless, John stood there, when suddenly the chef appeared. He told John that Selma had not boarded the ship. Instead, she had taken their child and fled upstream toward the silver mine village. Meanwhile, Selma was about to cross the river on a bamboo raft when Henry, who had been chasing her, spotted her. But surprisingly, Henry didn't arrest her. Instead, he gave her his personal pistol. At that moment, father and daughter finally recognized each other. Yet, fate didn't allow their reunion to last, and they had to part again. After saying goodbye to his daughter, Henry called off the hunt. But his wife secretly ordered the chase to continue. John followed Selma's trail, trekking through the vast, harsh jungle. Finally, at the mountain peak, he found her. They ran into each other's arms, holding tight, grateful to be alive. It seemed they had escaped their fate and could now live peacefully. But a gunshot shattered their happiness. Henry's men had caught up to them. The leader tied John to a pillar and prepared to harm Selma right in front of him. John fought with all his might, his anger fueling incredible strength. He broke free from the bonds and charged at the attacker with full force. But with his hands still tied, he was thrown to the ground again. Just as the man was about to kill John, a gunshot echoed. Selma fired the pistol Henry had given her, but as she aimed to shoot again, the gun jammed, just as death approached. Suddenly, a poisoned arrow hit the man's throat. It was the tribe John once helped. They had arrived just in time to save them both. In the end, John and Selma decided to remain in the jungle instead of going back to England. The place where they met would now be their home forever. The man who once wanted to civilize the natives had been changed by them instead. Perhaps love is like that. It's not about changing the other person, but finding harmony in each other's differences. Maybe that's the true meaning of love. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.